Hello there. In this video we're going to continue our look at Flash Catalyst, and we're going to introduce the data list. The data list is Catalyst's most advanced component. With the data list we're able to define what we call design time data, which is data that the designer can modify using a panel inside of Flash Catalyst to customize what's going to be displayed in the object. The wireframe component data list gives you a pre-built data list that you can use. But it's actually far easier to create one from scratch and then convert that into a data list component. Right now I'm inside that same project that we worked on. So if you actually open that up from the last video and go into the eat state, we can actually get started from there. The eat state of our application is going to show all the different menu options that are available for purchase on our fictitious airline. With this, we want to display a picture of it. We want it to have some sort of background that's going to highlight that particular object. And then we also want the text that's actually going to display the name of the object. So let's use the drawing tools to quickly rough out how we want that to look. So I'm going to use the rounded rectangle drawing tool and create a box that's just going to represent the background for that particular object. So I don't want it to be gray. Let's create a lighter gray for this. And then I also want a placeholder graphic, or in this case a bitmap. So instead of actually importing a bitmap, I'm just going to use the rectangle tool and just draw out a placeholder graphic that will represent the bitmap later. OK, so that's created. I'm going to give that a slightly darker fill just so we can discern that from the object that we created earlier. Great, now I've got the two objects. So I'm going to use the text tool and then create the name of the object. So I'm going to click here, and let's just call this food name. I am going to select that food name object, and let's position it up here. Let's convert this into fit height, which means, again, that I have I can set the width, but the height will adjust based on the number of lines that are actually in the text field. So let's make that 100, and then I want to align this to center. And let's position that in the center here. So what we've created is one instance of a food object. Now, in a data list, we're able to create an entire list of objects based on a reference object. What we've done is we've created that first object that the data list is going to use to populate all the other instances inside of the component. So let's actually select all three of those objects and create a data list from this. When I have these three objects selected, I can then convert artwork to a component. And I actually want to build that data list. A data list is a component inside of Flash Catalyst that requires the interaction designer to go through a couple steps in order to successfully complete creating that component. You'll notice that the heads-up display prompts you along the way. This is also common for when we're building out a scroll bar or other components that have required parts that need to be identified in order for the component to work. The data list is based on what's known as the repeated item. That's that reference object I mentioned before that Catalyst is going to rely on to then take that reference object or repeated item and then build out the list based on that. We need to go inside of this component and say, what is that repeated item? Now, you might ask yourself, well, we selected the repeated item. Why would I have to select that? Well, I might have created a background graphic that would represent the entire data list. I might not necessarily want that to be part of the repeated item. So Catalyst, instead of assuming that, actually asks us to select what specifically we want to be that repeated item. So let's go into click the Edit Parts button here, and that will take us into an Edit and Place mode. So now we're inside of this data list, and it's going to ask us to identify what are the pieces that are going to represent that repeated item. So let's select those three objects that we had created before, and then convert to data list part. And let's click that drop-down menu, and as you can see, we have repeated item, which is noted as required. So I'm going to click that checkbox. So that has now been created as a repeated item. Automatically, Catalyst has created 4 duplicate copies of that repeated item to kind of get us started. You'll see that everything is kind of listed in this vertical layout. Now, a data list can display objects in a vertical arrangement, a horizontal arrangement, or in a tile-based arrangement. To modify that, we want to scroll down the Properties panel and open up the Layout section. You'll see inside of here I have all 3 of those same options I mentioned before: vertical, horizontal, and tile. This particular data list I want to present in a tile-based layout. So if I click Tile, I can then modify the direction of this particular component. To create this tile-based layout, I need to make the actual dimensions or bounds of this item a little bit different. So I'm going to click and drag this handle in the lower right-hand corner, and we're going to drag that out so that the display area of this particular data list is now oriented a little bit differently. With the tile selected, I have the option of defining if I want my tile layout to be based on rows or on columns. I can change the alignment and also increase or decrease the spacing between the rows or the columns. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go into what's known as the design time data for this particular component. So let's click in the breadcrumb trail back out to the main application. With this selected, you'll now see that it's identified as a data list. So I have data list selected here. The component has a couple options here. You notice that I have the addition of selected index, tab index, and other things here. Let's actually open up the Design Time Data panel. The Design Time Data panel captures all the specific text items or bitmap items that are part of a data list and makes them available for us to modify. If you remember, when we created that data list component, I mentioned that it created 4 duplicate copies of that original reference object or that repeated item. We first defined that with the phrase food name. So that's why all the example copies here have just food name. If you click into any one of these objects, you can also modify the text on each one of these instances. So I can say, let's make this a hamburger. I can click Tab to then go from each cell to the next. So I can go hamburger, chicken salad, tuna sandwich, chips, and cookies. If you notice, the stage has been updated with the names of each one of those objects as I've modified them inside of the Design Time Data panel. If I want to add additional objects, I would just click the Add Row button, and that will create additional copies. So let's actually create a few more now. Now, if I actually wanted to run this, all I'm going to have access to are the first 3 rows of the objects. If you notice, the other ones have moved down below the limits of this display area. What we need in order to control this is a scroll bar. So let's actually double-click into this. And now that we're back inside of the data list, we can create a scroll bar to then control this data list. So we can display more of the objects that have gone beyond the limits of this component.